Hey, critical thinkers, welcome to this new episode of Healthy and Awake podcast. And today I am incredibly excited about our guest. If you've heard any of my earlier episodes, or especially my guest spots where I do other people's podcasts, I very commonly talk about something called fifth generation warfare. And let me explain it this way. When you think of warfare, typically most people picture two opposing groups of people shooting at each other, tanks, things like that. Now, fifth generation warfare takes that a step further. It's an evolution in the next step of warfare. And that's where we're at today, meaning it spills over into civilian life. We're all affected by this type of irregular warfare. And it also has a cognitive element, meaning there's deception and propaganda involved to shape the way you think, to essentially change your behavior to support agendas that are other people's agendas and not your own, usually while making you think that it was of your own volition, that you came up with these ideas and you're doing it on your own behalf. That is how deceptive propaganda and cognitive warfare can be. And the reason I talk about this as a board certified health coach is because how can you make healthy decisions if you aren't even in control of your own mind and thought process and decision making process? So you can't make healthy decisions if you allow yourself to be under attack and leave yourself vulnerable and do nothing to defend yourself from those attacks. Now, one of the reasons I became so fascinated with this topic, fifth generation warfare, is because I'm a big fan of General Michael Flynn. He put out a book called Fifth Generation Warfare that really details all of this stuff out. Not about health at all. I'm really the one that applies this to health and focuses on that a lot. But this book was written by General Michael Flynn and co-authored by Sergeant Boone Cutler, who is today's guest. And I got to meet him in person at a podcasting event hosted by Clay Clark. So once I met him there in person, I asked him to be on the show. He agreed, and that's where we are today. So I want to tell you a little bit more about Sergeant Boone Cutler before I actually roll today's episode. So, as indicated by Sergeant Boone Cutler, he has a military service background, and he actually served as a psychological operations team sergeant in Iraq, particularly Sadr City. And the first book that he put out, Call Sign Voodoo, is about that experience, which brings me to my next point here. He is also an author and advocate who wrote several books, including the one I just mentioned, Call Sign Voodoo, which details his experience in Iraq and his recovery at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Further, he co-authored the book I earlier mentioned, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare with General Michael T. Flynn, which explores modern warfare tactics and their implications. I highly recommend that book, really, so you can understand your surroundings, your environment, the world that you live in. And they don't talk about health at all. But if you are interested in health and defending yourself in a warfare environment, I think is a very healthy thing to do, so that you're not just surviving, but you're thriving. So continuing on with some of the background of Sergeant Boone Cutler, he created something called the Spartan Pledge to prevent veteran suicides, a commitment among veterans to support each other and seek help when needed. The pledge has gained significant traction and is widely respected in the veteran community. And there's a pretty intense background behind that Spartan Pledge. And so, if you like this episode, you find Boone interesting, that's maybe something to look into, especially if you're a supporter of the veterans. Continuing along with the background, he is a media personality. He's hosted Tipping Point with Boone Cutler, a radio show focused on veteran issues and the warfighter perspective. He was also diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's in 2012 from a wartime injury, leading him to raise awareness about such injuries within the veteran community. And I was surprised to read that about him, because just talking to him, you would never guess that. but he's also an advocate for alternative therapies, promotes alternative medical treatments for veterans, including cannabis, stem cells, psychedelics, and hormone replacement therapy. I did not get to ask him about any of that, although I wanted to spend a lot of time on it. So hopefully there will be another one where we can talk about that more in depth. And finally, the last point here is he frequently speaks at events and conferences such as the 2019 Vet Expo, where he addresses the challenges veterans face during their transition to civilian life. I mentioned that I met him at a Clay Clark event where he was a speaker. And in this episode, we discuss some of the things that I've talked about in the bio here, particularly leaning towards fifth generation warfare and his next book with General Michael Flynn. I do want to say one more quick disclaimer before I run the episode itself. All the guests that I talk to have different opinions than me. Not in all ways, but I haven't had a single guest where I agree with absolutely everything they say. And I don't think I'll ever have a guest like that unless I'm interviewing like a clone of myself. My point here is that, he says a few things that I'm expecting some viewers maybe don't agree with, or maybe they have differing opinions on certain views that he holds. And that's totally fine, right? This is an open platform for anyone who's willing to have respectful dialogue on healthy and awake topics. And so Sergeant Boone Cutler is really a perfect guest for many, many reasons. I hope to have him back. I hope you enjoy this episode. And I think that's everything. So without further ado, Sergeant Boone Cutler. So Boone, part of the reason I wanted to speak with you today is because fifth generation warfare is a big part of what I talk about. And ultimately, I don't think people can really make healthy decisions if they're basically under constant attack, under constant influence campaigns, nudging their decisions when most of them don't even realize this is happening. And I have your books here. I have the first one, Fifth Generation Warfare, that you wrote with General Michael Flynn. I have the second one on AI. I'm working on getting the third one, which I do want to talk to you about. And I believe this is your first book, Call Sign Voodoo. Is that right? Your first book?
Yeah, Call Sign Voodoo was my first book that I authored actually during my tour in Iraq in 2005, 2006 in Sadr City. And it was finished during my time at Walter Reed after I was medevaced out of Iraq. So I talk about, the war and what that did, the soldier perspective, very, very much on the ground, very visceral in that book. And I'll say, that was 2005, 2006. Some of my opinions have changed over time because more information has come out about the whole situation. But I will say, as far as a soldier story goes, that's about as raw and as real as you're going to get.
Yeah. Well, by the way, thank you for your service and everything you've done for our country. I do appreciate it. And I know my audience does too. And well, with regard to fifth generation warfare, I mean, there are so many questions I have, but maybe let's set the scene first, because I often hear fifth generation warfare used the same as cognitive warfare. But if I understand it correctly, cognitive warfare is a component of fifth generation warfare, or am I not getting that exactly right?
No, you got it right. But each of the other components also has a cognitive effect. I mean, for instance, if you talk about political warfare, you talk about lawfare. Lawfare has a cognitive effect. As you're seeing now, you're seeing people like, for instance, J6. You're seeing the J6ers. They get rolled up. They're going through all this turmoil, going through all this trouble. What does that do? It has a cognitive effect to make people not want to assemble because they're afraid they would be in the same type of predicament. So even though, yes, cognitive warfare is a component part of fifth generation warfare, all the factors of fifth generation warfare operate in the cognitive battle space.
Gotcha. And then so biological warfare might be a component of that too, like fentanyl, for example.
Well, the fentanyl issue, I wouldn't go into biological warfare so much with that as I would go into more like network disruption. I would go into, anything that breaks down the structure of a society and absorbs resources and removes people out of productivity, that productive space, tears up families, tears up culture. That's part of fifth generation warfare. Absolutely. You see it happening, with the fentanyl that's coming up from the South. How many resources have been put into that? And it's not, they're not putting resources at the border. It's taking county and city and state resources across the country to deal with it. And it's breaking up families. It's stopping work production. It's causing more health issues. It's causing death, a tremendous amount of deaths, which causes more disruption. So it is like putting a biological agent inside of a country. This is true, but I would not consider it so much for the, under the auspices of biological warfare or chemical warfare. But that is very relative. I mean, if I really kind of twist my mind around, I'm like, yeah, it kind of does fit, but it's to break down a society. And that's what it does. And the same has been done. I mean, there have been other countries that pushed a tremendous amount of like heroin into Iran, because that was what was breaking down, that dogmatic structure of the mullahs, of religion, of the political theocracy of Islam. And you pull them into the drug space, and then that breaks them away from that structure. Well, this is a game that's gone on over and over again. It's part of statecraft, and everybody does it. And we just need to realize that's what it's about. I think it's so important to learn about statecraft, and you get that comes in session 3, because people just don't know how much they are affected by the levers of power. They don't understand how they're directly affected by statecraft, soft power, sharp power, hard power, all these different things that we talk about, that certain people talk about, and certain people obviously have, that's their life's work. So it's important to understand, every American out there, every citizen of the world needs to understand that there's somebody out there pulling strings, that are pressing levers to change your world. And it's important to understand who these entities are, and it's important to understand what their objectives are when they do these things. And that's what all these books about. I got to say, it's been very heartwarming for me to listen to people that are thankful for the fact that we've actually written military style manuals specifically for civilians. I mean, all the stuff that you would get compiled into military manuals for members of the military, there's a reason, there's a way those things are written. And there's an objective with each one of them. It's truly training, and it's to reinforce training that you're getting in the, that you're getting in direct contact with an instructor. Well, and then the follow-up is the instructor teaches from the manual, and then the manuals are available to the students, so the students can follow on with their training and use it as a resource guide. So these and continue more training. So this is kind of the thing, and this is where people have become very, very appreciative of the work General Flynn and I are doing, because they're getting straight information. It's just straight up. There's nothing in there that is there to be selective, to sway you. It's like, hey, these are the facts. These are the things that are happening. This is how it affects people. This is the intention behind these things. And here's some things that you can do to pull the power back on your side, so you're not affected by these entities that conduct statecraft.
Yeah. And I am such a fan of the books, and these are my favorite type of book to read. As you said, it's informational. There's a lot in there that's very useful. And I'm definitely going to put show notes in the links in the show notes below for people to purchase. And if I'm not mistaken, I heard you say on another podcast that you prefer people buy through Barnes and Nobles. Is that still the case?
Well, now I prefer people just buy through generalflynn.com.
Okay.
We've got a pretty good, stockpile there. In the past, we didn't, so we were selling through these other venues, and also it's cheaper. You go to generalflynn.com, you're going to get it at a better rate. Matter of fact, I think there's a deal on there. You can get all 3 in the entire series for $80. If you tried to do that on Amazon, it would cost you $93 plus and plus. So it's a better value for everybody if you just buy it through generalflynn.com. And and we want to get these into people's hands. I get really fed up with people out there when they're bullshit. I see people all the time that don't do anything. I mean, they do nothing but bitch. They don't help anything. And they really don't. And they're just disruptors and distractors. But at the end of the day, we're trying to get these things into people's hands. It's not the easiest thing in the world. If you've ever sat down and tried to write a book, you'll see that it's a little bit like purgatory.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. And, you take, between General Flynn and I, that's 40, maybe more years worth of experience in these particular fields. He was the head of DIA, the National Security Advisor, there's really people need to pay attention. You're not going to get this information anywhere else. And you can sit with it and you can learn. And at the end of each chapter, there's chapter questions kind of to keep everybody oriented on where this is going.
Mhm.
And I think that's really been the benefit. And we've changed up the technique a little bit in the writing based upon the audience. And so like now you're going to see in session 3, you are going to see an executive summary. You're going to see a small summary of each chapter, kind of a peek, before you start each chapter. It's not going to roll right in. It's going to explain the chapter, explain the reason for the chapter. It's going to explain kind of some key points that really need to be foot stomped a little bit. And then you go into the chapter. So, we're getting better at writing these for this audience, and the audience is responding to it, and it's becoming very effective. Session 3, the role of the church is how to mobilize and organize and mobilize 2.6 billion Christians around the world. And right now, if you're going to fight this Marxist agenda, that has to happen.
Well, I suspect a lot of my audience might not understand the Marxist agenda component of it. I actually did speak previously with a professor who does talk a little bit about it, but would you mind elaborating on that a little bit, and especially as it relates to the third book?
Well, anytime you're talking about this leftist agenda is going to push everything towards communism. And the pathway, it's a 2-stage revolution we talk about in session 1. First, stage 1 is socialism, then it's communism. And if you're already in a socialist country, it's directly to communism. When we talk about the uniparty, these are terms that people throw around, but they don't understand the history that, this term uniparty is not a new thing. Lenin referred to it as the vanguard party, where you would take members of the parties kind of in a clandestine fashion, unite them by topic, by subject, and then they would agree on certain things. And then the next thing you know, the revolution happens. They're professional revolutionaries is what they are. And then the revolution that happens, and then the people inside there saturated in the government are already on the same sheet of music because they've already collaborated. And then the outliers are just kind of cut off. So this is all technique, and it's nothing new. It gets done over and over and over again. We're just putting a light on it so people can recognize what they're looking at. When General Flynn and I, when we started these things, it was very much a visceral response to things that both he and I were seeing. He was speaking to target audiences that were primarily evangelicals, and I was talking with audiences that are basically in the veteran community. I've been in the veteran community in that space doing advocacy for, a decade. And at the end of the day, he says to me, we're standing in the hallway, and he says, I get off stage and people come up to me and they just say they feel so manipulated by things around them. They don't know what to do. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting because he has a completely different target audience than I do. But when I get off stage, when I talk to people privately, it's the same thing. So when he's talking to evangelicals who are feeling the same way as, say, my audience in the veteran community, I could be talking to a gay Black female in Chicago, or who leans left, and I could be talking to a corn-fed white boy in Alabama who leans right, and they both feel the same way.
Yeah.
Now, and then he's telling me this evangelical crowd, they're feeling the same way. And then it took about 3.5 seconds for us to look at each other and say, okay, irregular warfare, and this is, when you kind of combine the whole thing, you talk about fifth generation warfare. And it was like, okay, what are we going to do about it? How do we get people to understand what they're looking at and to take down the confusion? Because at the end of the day, people who are confused do nothing. This is a fact. And so how do we take away the confusion so they can decide for themselves in which way they want to act, and they can choose the path that they want to take, and they can choose to not be affected by the things that are affecting them in ways that they don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, folks, are you ready to take control of your health and feel your best? At Avantia Health Optimization, which is my health coaching company, we get that everyone is different, so we tailor our coaching programs just for you. Meaning we're not just handing you some cookie cutter program. We're not giving you some documents and saying, hey, just here, go do this on your own. No, we listen to your goals. We hear what you're trying to accomplish. We learn about your habits and routines and time management and approaches and everything in between. And it is completely tailored to you. So if you're dealing with stress, sleep issues, weight loss, changing your diet, being consistent with exercise, or if you just want to feel more vibrant and awake, our health coaches are here to help. Now, for a limited time, you can try our health coaching for just $1. Yes, your first health coaching session is just $1. It's a great way to see how personalized health coaching can make a real difference in your life. And it is just $1 because I know a lot of people have never tried health coaching. They don't really know what it's all about. A lot of people still think that I'm a personal trainer, which is not at all what I do as a health coach. So if you want some proof about how we've helped people, you can check out the testimonials on our website from clients who have already transformed their health with us. Head over to avantiahealthoptimization.com, or if it's easier, you can go to mikevera.com. That's Mike, V as in Victor, ERA.com to learn more and snag your $1 first session today. So let's get started on your journey to a healthier, more awake you with Avantia Health Optimization. Now back to the show. And I do want to ask a little more about the third book. You know, I'll admit I'm not a particularly religious person. I went to Catholic school. If anything, that pushed me further away from the idea of religion. And I say that with the utmost respect to people who are, because I do see a lot of good come out of religion. I respect people's faiths. And at the same time, I do understand that religion and church is something that can be infiltrated. Religion is something that can be weaponized. And can you tell me a little bit more about what readers might expect from the third book?
Well, first of all, it's all based on free will, right? And what you're seeing right now is you're seeing the breakdown of a traditional structure in the United States that is focused on free will. And whenever you see this leftist or Marxist agenda, they're going to pull people away from God and push people towards materialism. You see that a lot with the CCP. You know, I mean, who provides all the products in the United States that people literally don't pay their rent for so they can own the next new thing? You know, who produces that stuff? That comes from a materialistic point of view. You know, keeping up with the Joneses, creating this insanity. So when you get into the role of the church, which what we're really talking about is people who have, you know, the people who prefer to defend their right to free will as an inalienable right. And there are definitely within the Marxist leftist agenda, free will is not a thing. It's do what we say, how we say to do it. You know, it's like we give a very, very good example and very good background for people to understand. When the left uses the phrase democracy, they're not talking about representative democracy. They're talking about collective democracy. They're talking about democratic centralism. And democratic centralism is a totally different thing. So it's important to understand. And I hear guys on the right, oh, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Why? We're both, okay? I mean, and you read the book, you'll get it, okay? We're both, but what we're not is we're not centralized. Democratic centralism, that is straight communism. So when you talk about all these things, it's really important to understand the origin, and it's really important to understand the true definition, not this hyperbole stuff, but true definition. So when the left is always like, well, this is a breakdown of democracy, we need to protect democracy, what they're really talking about is democratic centralism. And democratic centralism is all bad. There is no constitution in that instance. It is about the party and how the party decides to make rules, and to make rules on top of rules. There's no rule of law. So when we talk about the role of the church, we're talking about rule of law. We're talking about free will. And it's really based upon people who want to support and defend the rule of law and free will, and to have the choice. You know, the Christians by and large say, hey, they stand on free will. That means if you want to choose to believe, believe. If you don't, then don't. If you want to be Muslim, go be Muslim. Go do whatever you want to do. That's between you and God. But the one thing that is, I think, a steadfast across the board is don't mess with free will. Leave that alone. And I think that's one part that we can all agree on as Americans, that free will and the rule of law and the Constitution are all things that we're built on, and it needs to be protected.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have noticed, I was even talking to Dr. Stella Emanuel recently, and her episode is right before yours. And there does seem to be this rising movement of Christianity, which I think is a good thing because of the values, especially free will, as you mentioned. And I have noticed this phenomenon where when there is no sense of faith or religious values, or even sometimes values at all, it does create this vacuum for materialism or even worship of the state in a certain way. And I even see this. I talk to many doctors. I see scientism instead of science, where science becomes their religion, and it opens up, in my opinion, really this window for a lot of flawed thinking, because science can also be infiltrated and weaponized. And I think in many ways that's
And
what's
we've
led us.
seen that, and it's starting to come out now. We've seen
Absolutely.
that, and this is another thing. We're not doing ourselves any favors by removing the credibility and legitimacy of government institutions. And that really does not help us. And the real hat trick here is, we've got to bring back the credibility and legitimacy of our own institutions, because as soon as they're not credible, as soon as they're not legitimate, that gives rise to people to want something new, as far as the government goes, because the government is delegitimized. And we need to, the hat trick is, re-legitimizing our government at the same time providing national defense at the same time. And right now they're pushing us into this national defense posture, which is really national offense posture, not defense posture. And in doing so, it's taking away the focus on what we need to fix and change here at home within our institutions. Corrupting the institution of government, corrupting the institutions of law, corrupting the institutions of education. These are all goals in statecraft. They're all goals in statecraft. And it's one of these things where, okay, we need to get back to focusing on making the United States very, very strong. We need to close our borders. We need to reestablish what election integrity looks like, and do it well, not all these little band-aids. And as you were talking about before, when we're talking about our medical establishment, I mean, it's now been ruled on by the Ninth Circuit Court that the COVID vaccine, safe and effective, was a slogan. It was just a slogan. There was no basis in fact that it was safe or effective. It was a slogan. It was a sales pitch. And it's a sales pitch that got a lot of people killed. So now who's going to believe the validity? They've lost their legitimacy. They've lost. People no longer believe in anything the NIH or the WHO or all these organizations. Fauci himself. These people made a ton of money voting, buying stock in certain companies that became mandated for people to use, and if they didn't use them, they were penalized. And that was horrible. And I'll tell you what, I saw that before. And that's why I was not buying into the BS. It was, when I was a patient at Walter Reed Armored Medical Center, I was there for 2 years after the war. And there was a ton of medications. There was a ton of drugs. And if you didn't take the drugs, you were considered non-compliant to treatment, and you would be punished. I mean, they would harass you. You would have a problem if you were non-compliant to treatment. And this was a doctor saying, "Oh, they're not taking their meds." So, and then your chain of command is like, "Hey, docs, so we're going to have to sit down with chain of command and the doctors and find out what's the problem with you." And it was very adversarial. It was very adversarial. And I think a lot of those medications that we were forced on led to a lot of suicides, led to a lot of deaths. So I've seen this game before. And so when it came out, this COVID scare, and if you ask me, what do I think really happened? I think, well, we know that there was a lab leak, and I think there was a there was a large group of people that didn't exactly know what the hell leaked out. And so they were willing to take a lot of chances on vaccinations that were not safe, that were not effective, to try and curtail the effects of some gain of function stuff that wasn't exactly COVID, you know. And so the world went ape shit over it and forced all this stuff. And they made it easy because how many politicians made money from Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson and Johnson? A lot. How much did Fauci make off of that? A lot. You know, I would bet my T-shirt on it and everything else I have, because that's how you get these things moving. You know, in order to bribe officials these days, you don't have to give them an envelope of money. It doesn't happen that way. You don't even have to give them a free trip to wherever to hang out with, you know, whoever to do whatever. You don't have to do that anymore. You just have to. They already know. You know, I mean, when they sit there like, hey, how am I going to vote? I don't know what stock is going to. Oh, Raytheon. Raytheon's going to be. Well, let me buy some of that Raytheon. Their vote comes up. Next thing you know, there's a big contract awarded. Blah 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 blah. Going to war. Now we got the military industrial complex spun up, and everybody voting on the laws to spin that up. We're making money off of the stock, or someone close to them is. They're still benefiting. You know, so you got the military industrial complex, you got the medical industrial complex. These are all institutions that Americans should be able to have faith in. And we don't. We don't. So therefore, it breaks down that national will of our country that makes us want to defend it. Like right now, where's the national will in America? Are Americans lining up going, hey, I'll volunteer. Let's go to Ukraine. No, it's not happening. Okay, especially after that bullshit that happened in Afghanistan, especially after this next round of veterans that came home and ran into nothing but here's your pharma, you know, somebody. So they make money on getting us hurt and killed, and then we come home and they make money off hurting us more and getting us killed. So who wants to play that game anymore? I'm not playing that game anymore. And I volunteered to serve my country. I volunteered to go to war, I'm not upset about that. That was my choice. But at the same time, I've learned a few things since then. I think our government has gotten more corrupt since then. And we, the American people, need to coalesce to change our government 100%. Because if we don't, we're just going to be controlled by more and more foreign powers or more and more corporations. In my opinion, it's equally as bad. I have no love for major corporations, for multinational corporations that apply statecraft to a population, that influence the levers of power inside of a country. I don't have any more love for them than I do the CCP itself.
Well, a lot of what you're saying is actually making me reassess my own perspective, because I'm definitely guilty of putting out a lot of content that sows distrust in some of our institutions, like the NIH, the World Health Organization, the FDA, even the American education system, Department of Education. Now, I do try to walk the fine line. I'm not saying burn it all down and let's start from the beginning, but I do like to encourage people to think for themselves. So based on what you're saying, I think I'm going to have to spend some time thinking and maybe even re-listen to this episode and be a little more careful about how I express that. Cause I completely agree with what you're saying. I think, you know, I'm a proud American. I got the American flag on my shirt right now, you know, and I'm very proud to say that. Hey, folks, just a quick pause on our discussion today because I have something important to share. You know that I'm always in front of screens because I do content creation. My health coaching is done online. I'm doing the podcast. I'm writing all these different things. And that artificial light can be disruptive to the circadian rhythm, and that can impact your health pretty severely. So that's why I wear Bond Charge blue light blocking glasses. It's not just a stylish accessory, but it's really a daily defense against eye strain, headaches, disrupted sleep schedules, and really that circadian rhythm that I'm trying to protect. So it does protect your eyes. It does improve your sleep. It does help maintain your circadian health. And honestly, I've experienced fewer headaches and just a better overall sense of my health. I feel healthier when I wear these. And yeah, they do look cool as well. I get compliments all the time, especially when I wear them out at a restaurant or something like that. So, for those who are looking to boost their health in this digital age, I've got some good news. As part of the Healthy and Awake community, you can get 15% off by going to the show notes, clicking the affiliate link, and using the coupon code Healthy and Awake with dashes. So that's healthy and awake. And you can get 15% off of these very cool bond charge blue light blocking glasses. And that's a great way to enhance your daily health routine and your style. Now let's dive back into the episode. But I want to make sure that I'm spreading a positive message, one that's productive, instead of something that maybe causes more confusion and causes distrust in a way that might be negative and unhelpful, instead of, saying, hey, maybe you should be a little distrustful for your own health, but at the same time, the institutions are there for a reason. Does that all make sense?
It makes sense. And this is really the conflict, right? I mean, the real conflict that we have right now is we have to defend our country from foreign adversaries, but we have to have the desire to do so because we trust our government. And trust is at an all-time low, which makes us a more susceptible to foreign incursion. So this is really, really the hat trick that nobody talks about. We have to strengthen our country to make it more, not even more viable, but more trustworthy, on behalf of the people. At the same time, we have to defend our borders, and when you force people in the military to take a vax, it's not safe, it's not effective. And yeah, I do think there was a huge deception operation that went on there on multiple levels that I won't get into right now. But all the factors were there to really get certain. I mean, you talk about bio warfare. The real bio warfare isn't fentanyl. It was the vax.
I know, yeah.
And it was probably in response to a bio something that people thought was going to be released across the world. And so they took chances on that vax, and it was easy to do because people got paid by pushing it. They got paid a lot. And there was a lot of, when we wrote as you've seen in the AI book, where they used the most amount of AI in history so far was COVID. It was how to corral, how to control the message, how to shut down people that were against the message. It was huge. It was absolutely huge. And it's all in there. And people should really understand, those techniques that were used so they can recognize them when they see them again. Because if it works, people are going to do it again. This is a fact. So again, I guess you talk about, being a podcaster, and I don't do nearly as many podcasts as a lot of people do. And my biggest complaint, and also there's a nugget of advice in here too. I came from the radio game. I was on air, terrestrial radio for a number of years, and I really enjoyed that. And it was a good thing for me, especially at the time. It gave me a place to be and a thing to do when I really needed it. But I learned, when I first got on air, I was angry. I was angry. And so my anger was constantly coming out, and there was a lot of angst. And it was, my show Tipping Point with Boone Cutler, the Warfighter Perspective. I was on CBS, I was on Fox affiliate, out of Reno. And it was a big deal. And this was before podcasts even happened. And I really, really learned about responsibility, not at the time, but looking back, I really learned about how much responsibility you have to an audience when you put out information. And right now, people are angry, and there's a lot of angst. There's a lot of this. So when they get someone who has the same angst, they just attach to them. And there's a lot of cool kids. Let's face it. There's a lot. The podcast world is full of cool kids, and everybody wants to hang out with the cool kid on the playground. And people ignore the smart kid in the classroom when they do that. And so if I'm going to do anything to help change that space, that information space, it's to tell all the cool kids, slow the fuck down and pay attention to the smart kid before you throw some stuff out there because it's going to activate people and create this situation. And I know you're just looking for likes, clicks, and shares. And I know you're getting paid off of all that stuff. And you got to get an audience up so you can get sponsors. But now you're doing tabloid level work. Tabloid level work. Are you a credible journalist or are you a tabloid? Because tabloids have been around for a long, long time and they make a lot of money and they're not going anywhere. They're going to be around a long time because it feeds into something people want. Look at television now. There's so much tabloid TV. It used to be like a current affair and that was the only thing. But now with the proliferation of how media is created, so many channels, so many, it's segmented in so many different ways that anybody can buy into their own soap opera. And that's what it is. It's a soap opera, people. You're part of a soap opera based upon your own susceptibilities and vulnerabilities, which means you're self-identifying, which means somebody is probably going to manipulate you as soon as you self-identify in such a way. So I guess we're getting back to the point of this conversation, or this part of the conversation, which is everybody out there, when you're watching that cool kid that you just think is just the most badass dude in the world, and he's out there, boom, he's beating really beating the hammer on that stuff, really beating the drum on something. Are they also a credible journalist? And I'm not saying that those who call themselves credible journalists are any better, because they're doing the same thing. Everybody's doing the same thing, which is trying to get an audience, and they'll say anything, they'll do anything to build that audience because that's what they get paid. I look at some of these blue check marks on X, and I watch what they do. I see the technique. It's the same technique it's always been. It's say that you like the big guy, whether it's Trump, right? Oh, I love Trump. Now they're Trump groupies. And then they pull all the Trumpsters to them because they're Trump groupies, right? And then what do? Now they start creating dissension. Oh, Trump is great, but this person's trying to subvert them. Yes. That person's trying to subvert them. Guys, look around. This game is not new. If I want to infiltrate a group, what do? I say I really like the leader, and then I whisper about the people in the group. It's called the whisper campaign, rumor campaign. And why? To divide the group. And now it's being done on social media through all the cool guys. And the cool guys usually don't even realize it's happening because they just learned that from another cool guy. And there's really no research involved, but they know that their likes, shares, and clicks are going up. So they keep doing it. Meanwhile, we're feeding into the soap opera. Get away from the soap opera. It's bad. It's all bad. And so this is another reason why I really don't do a lot of podcasts. What I really need to do, if I'm smart, is I need to, I could do my own podcast. But I hate it, man. I really do. I'm not one of the guys that can just kind of sit out there and every day's got to put out a blurb. I would rather write and do seminars where I can be with people, and take questions, and we can share the same space for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. We could smell each other. We know there's no bots in the room. We could coalesce as a group. That's where my game is, man. My game is not in the digital space. My game is in the physical domain with people, with human beings who want to learn and enrich themselves and come up with a plan and actually activate themselves to make change. That's where my game is at. And I know I have to support that with podcasts. So I do. I can do it better. I could do it a lot better. I don't do it well enough. I need to do better. That's on me. But these are just the things that, have come up in this conversation. I think people are going to want to hear it. But if they don't, they don't. But it's the truth as I see it.
What you said about soap operas and sort of getting sucked into things to the point where you might just be focused on clicks instead of delivering actual truth. That's one of the reasons I try to stay in my own lane. I'm a board certified health coach. And when I talk, I try to stick to just that. And when I'm not, I'm talking to experts like yourself with regard to the vaccine. I spoke with Dr. Peter McCullough because partially because it takes some of the pressure off of me. I'm not a medical doctor and I don't want to be accused of trying to generate clicks just for fun or anything like that. But then going into what you said about being in a physical location with a lot of people, the first time I met you in person was at one of Clay Clark's events for podcasters. And I had asked General Flynn a question about AI, and I'm curious about your answer, because AI is, as far as I can tell, a weapon, and a weapon that has the power to do just as much good as it does bad. And with the way things are right now, with OpenAI dominating the field, any usage of that is kind of feeding the beast. And I think possibly a very bad thing down the road. But at the same time, I use AI to help my reach. It helps me get my word out and spread truth and reach more people to spread my message and my mission. So I see it as, like a double-edged sword. I'm trying to do a lot of good with it, but I'm also feeding the beast at the same time. So I don't know if there is a right answer there, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the world is going to change. I mean, I guess that's a stupid answer, but it's going to change in a lot of ways, now. And we wrote about this in session 2, and we released it. We talk about the Turing test and how that is the inability to tell the difference between AI and human. And now it's past that. And people want to know how sentient it is, how self-aware it is. I think it's a lot more self-aware than people think. And all these things are factors. And it is a huge, I'll just say this, and this is a rule. Everybody can write it down because it'll never change. As long as there is a pecking order, and there will always be a pecking order as long as humans are animals, and we're animals. Believe every bit of that. And as long as that exists, everything is weaponized until something better can be weaponized. Everything. The vehicle, the gasoline engine, a trench, a gun, explosives, it doesn't matter. Everything is weaponized till something better can be weaponized. And right now, the thing that is best weaponized is AI. And when we write about AI, we're not talking about robots. That's the easy stuff. We're talking about AI-driven psychological programming, primarily that's foreign born. And when you talk about AI-driven psychological programming, you really learn about it. It's like you never want to see another one of these machines. I stay off my phone as much as possible. I mandate myself to stay off of it for 2 hours a day during waking hours for no reason other than I just need to be away from it. Because I tell people this, hey, listen, and everybody in your audience, I already know their answer, but we're going to ask the question. How many times, I'll give you an example. How many times have you been sitting with someone in a closed space? Say it's your spouse. And your spouse says to you, we really need to get some laundry detergent. Say you're in a car. And by the time you get home, you pull in your driveway, you've got an advertisement for laundry detergent on your phone. How do you think that happened? How do you think that happened? You think God just sent that down there? No, your phone did that on purpose because they are curating information. They're listening. They're turning it into answers for you. Well, if they can do that for products and services, they can also do that with ideology. So anything you're talking about, they're micro-messaging you to counter your message or to alter what you think and feel, so you will change your opinion and your perspective on things. This is a fact. This is not science fiction anymore. It's reality. And so until we really come to terms with a lot of these things that we're writing about, which quite honestly, I don't think people will. I don't think they will come to terms with it fast enough. I'm sure, not in my opinion. But I think at some point in time, people will. We're putting these books out there as a reference guide. So when people do finally get to the end of their rope and they're like, okay, this is all bad, what do I do? There's a place to go and to learn exactly what to do. Learn exactly how to focus, learn exactly who's doing it, learn exactly why they're doing it, and learn what you can do for yourself and for your family. But right now, everybody's caught up in the soap opera, and they don't realize the soap opera is feeding them exactly what they want to be fed and pulling them in the direction that they don't want to really go. This is reality. But, we got to wait for people to catch up to this reality and to identify it. And I think that will happen. But the more we can start listening to the smart kid in the classroom, not just the cool kid on the playground, the more we can get into the physical domain and be with each other, the better off we are. What happened to potlucks? What happened to block parties? When was the last time you heard anybody get invited to a block party? That used to happen all the time. It doesn't happen anymore because people are on the phones. How about a potluck? When was the last time you got invited to a potluck or you had a potluck? Doesn't happen. I advocate for people to have no phone potlucks. Have a potluck at your house. Everybody leave their phone in the car and just be people. If we can just start doing things like that again, it changes things exponentially.
Completely agree. Although I don't really trust most other people's cooking, but I totally get what you mean. With regard to the Facebook ads, and they basically seem to listen to you, and then an ad pops up.
No,
That's
it's not
one.
just Facebook, but
Right,
it's
right.
other.
Just as an example, that's one of the reasons that I'll usually talk about propaganda and marketing under the same breath, because as the way it seems to me is that even though there might be slightly different intent behind each of those things, ultimately they're deploying essentially the same strategies to nudge people in certain directions, to affect the way they think, to achieve a certain outcome. And I know we only have about 5 minutes left. I want to be very respectful of your time here. So I'm going to end with going back to fifth generation warfare. One of the things that I tell my audience very frequently is what I refer to as three pillars of influence. So there's protecting ourselves from the influence of others. There's learning to use those strategies so that we can influence ourselves. And then third, once we've learned those strategies, we can ethically influence others. And if we have a good message, a positive intent, we can basically use those strategies to spread our message. So, with the limited time we have left, is there one of those that you want to focus in on and talk about before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think everything you said revolves around something that we talk about quite a bit. When we do seminars and things, is everybody has to be able to identify when they see information. Is it truthful, believable, neither or both? Truthful, believable, neither or both. And this is the game that we're in right now. And if you're doing those things and you can determine what is truthful, not just believable, because everybody's hooked on what's believable right now, and it's not truthful at all. So, and there's some things that are truthful that aren't believable, but they're still truthful, and those are the things you got to latch on to. And some things are neither, and some things are both. It's great when something is truthful and believable. But there in session two, we go very deep into determining on how people can use strategies to determine what is actually truthful. And I think there is nothing more important right now that people need to do in order to be able to use their critical thinking skills than identifying what is truthful information, what is accurate. And intel drives maneuver. And if the intel is bad, the maneuver's bad. It means if you don't have the right information, you can't do the right thing. And so you got to get the right information. I wish I could tell everybody how to do that in less than 43,000 words, but I can't. Okay. We wrote it down. It's in session two. Go through the whole thing. Um, Understand a little bit of open source intelligence and how to collect it. Understand how to collect human intelligence. Understand what scheme is, how to identify propaganda. These things are so important. It literally is your life right now. It is the future. It is whether or not the next generation ends up literally being either food or propagandized by bots to the point that they live in the matrix in a totally different reality, or we actually survive as human beings and we can be humans with other humans. This is where we're at. And I'm skeptical whether we're going to figure it out in time, but I'm very positive that we will figure it out.
I hope so. And if we do, it's thanks to people like you who are out there trying to bring awareness to this sort of stuff, speaking the truth, and not being reserved and quiet in the midst of all this confusion. And I thank you for that. I thank you for your service. Sergeant Boone Cutler, where can people find out more about you and your work other than the show notes that I'm going to put down below?
I just follow the show notes. It's good enough.
You got it. Well, sir, thank you again so much for your time. And hopefully we can do this again soon or sometime, because I really enjoyed this. I think my audience is really going to enjoy this as well. So thank you very much, folks. Stay healthy, stay awake. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Healthy and Awake podcast. Please remember to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple, or if you're watching this on Rumble or YouTube, please be sure to give us a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought, or if you had any questions based on what we talked about in this episode. And of course, it couldn't hurt to share it with your friends, those who maybe are awake, or those, of course, who are waking up. Thanks again. Stay healthy.